A wax tablet arrives in Sparta around 480 BC, sent from deep inside the Persian Empire by a former Spartan king living in exile. The wax surface is completely blank. The messenger who carried it has no idea what it means. The Council of Sparta passes it around, confused, assuming nothing was written at all or that the message was meant to be delivered verbally and got lost somewhere along the journey. They are about to give up entirely. One person in the room understands what no one else does. She tells them to scrape the wax away. Underneath, carved directly into the wood, is the warning that will change the outcome of the Persian Wars. Xerxes is coming, and he is bringing an invasion force unlike anything Greece has ever faced. The person who solved this when an entire council of Spartan men could not was a woman named Gorgo, Queen of Sparta, wife of King Leonidas. The same Leonidas who would die 300-something men at a narrow mountain pass called Thermopylae in a battle so famous it eventually got its own Hollywood blockbuster in 2007. You have seen that movie, or at least you have seen its imagery. The abs, the capes, the slow-motion spears. What you almost certainly were never shown is the real woman standing behind the real king, whose documented intelligence, property, and political influence make her infinitely more interesting than anything the film decided to invent about her instead. This is the story of Spartan women and why the society that produced the most famous warriors in ancient history may have been even more radical by the standards of its own time for what it did with its women. Let's start with the part Hollywood actually got partly right, then immediately distorted for drama. The film 300 does give Gorgo screen time, considerably more than most ancient war epics give their female characters. But to manufacture tension, the film invents an entirely fictional scene in which Gorgo is sexually coerced by a council member named Theron in exchange for his political support. This scene has no basis in any ancient source. It does not appear in Herodotus, who wrote the primary historical account of this period. It does not appear in any Spartan or Greek tradition. It was invented for the screenplay, apparently because the filmmakers believed audiences needed a scene of sexual victimization to understand that Gorgo had political stakes in the war, rather than simply showing what she actually documented did, which was considerably more interesting and required no invented assault to make compelling. What she actually did, according to Herodotus writing in the 5th century BC, closer to these events than any modern filmmaker, was solve a piece of cryptography that stumped the entire Spartan leadership and helped Greece prepare for the Persian invasion that the film's entire plot depends on. The film needed a scene to prove Gorgo mattered politically. The history already had one. It simply was not violent or sexual, so it did not make the final cut. This pattern where the real documented power of a Spartan woman gets replaced on screen with a scene of victimization says something worth sitting with about what modern entertainment assumes audiences want to see from women in historical settings, even when the actual historical record offers something considerably more empowering and, frankly, more interesting, if that swap bothers you as much as it bothers us. Subscribe to Erased from History right now, because the real status of women in Spartan society goes far beyond one clever queen, and it will completely change how you think about what made Sparta different from every other Greek city-state. Athens, the city-state modern audiences tend to associate with the birthplace of democracy and philosophy, kept its women almost entirely confined to the household. Athenian women received no formal education, could not own property independently, could not appear unescorted in public for most purposes, and existed legally as the property first of their fathers and then of their husbands. This was the broad Greek norm. Sparta was the conspicuous exception, and the gap between the two systems was large enough that Greek writers outside Sparta frequently expressed open shock and often thinly disguised disapproval at what Spartan women were permitted to do. Spartan girls began formal physical training around the same age Spartan boys entered the agorge, roughly 6 or 7 years old. They wrestled, they ran, they threw javelins and discus. According to Plutarch, they often trained nude or in minimal clothing alongside young men, a practice that scandalized other Greeks but that Spartans justified specifically on the grounds that healthy, physically strong women would produce healthier, stronger children for the state. The goal was openly eugenic: train the mothers as rigorously as the soldiers, because Spartan ideology held that strong sons required strong mothers, not passive ones confined indoors. Spartan women could also read and write, received instruction in music and poetry, and participated in public religious festivals and athletic competitions in ways unthinkable for women anywhere else in the Greek world. A Spartan princess named Cynisca became the first woman in recorded history to win an event at the Olympic Games, training and entering chariot teams under her own name in the early 4th century BC, in a competition where women were not even permitted to attend in person as spectators, let alone compete. Sparta built her a commemorative shrine, the only woman in Spartan history known to have received one purely for athletic achievement rather than religious or royal status. Cynisca's Olympic victory deserves a slightly longer look than a single mention allows, because the structure of that achievement reveals something specific about how Spartan women operated, within rules technically designed to exclude them. Women were barred from competing in person at the ancient Olympics, and, by most accounts, from attending as spectators in the stadium itself. The chariot racing events, however, credited victory to the owner and trainer of the horses, rather than to the individual driver who physically rode the chariot during the race. Cynisca, daughter of a Spartan king, exploited this technicality by owning, breeding, and training the horses herself, while a male charioteer actually drove during the competition, allowing her to be formally declared the Olympic victor without ever needing to set foot in the stadium where the race occurred. This was not an accident or a loophole she stumbled into. Ancient sources indicate she pursued this path with clear intention, specifically because the chariot event's ownership rule was the only mechanism available through which a woman could claim an Olympic title at all under existing Greek athletic regulations. Sparta celebrated the achievement with a dedicated shrine, and later female members of other prominent Greek families, after seeing the precedent Cynisca established, attempted similar chariot ownership victories themselves, suggesting her success opened a path other ambitious women across Greece eventually noticed and tried to follow. Then there is property, the single fact that should most directly upend whatever image of ancient Greek womanhood you arrived at this video holding. Aristotle, writing critically about Spartan customs from an Athenian perspective in the 4th century BC, recorded with evident disapproval that women owned approximately 2/5 of all land in Sparta. Spartan inheritance practices allowed daughters to inherit alongside sons, generally receiving half of what a son received, alongside whatever property came through dowry arrangements. Combined across generations, this produced a female landholding class, substantial enough that Aristotle considered it a structural flaw worth specifically criticizing in his political writings, evidence that contemporary observers outside Sparta saw this concentration of female-controlled wealth as remarkable, even troubling, by the standards of their own societies. This means Spartan women could function, legally and economically, as independent property owners, while Athenian women across the same exact decades could not so much as inherit a house. Two Greek city-states, separated by roughly 100 miles, operating on almost entirely opposite assumptions about what women were legally capable of controlling. Gorgo herself embodies this pattern beyond the wax tablet story. Herodotus separately records that as a young girl, possibly no older than 8 or 9, she warned her own father, King Leonidas I, against accepting a bribe from a foreign diplomat attempting to manipulate Spartan foreign policy, reportedly telling him that the foreigner would ruin him if he did not throw the man out of the house immediately. Plutarch later preserved several of her sharper recorded remarks, including her famous reply when an Athenian woman asked why Spartan women were the only women in Greece permitted to rule their husbands. Gorgo's answer: "Because we are the only women who give birth to real men." That line has survived roughly 2,500 years, specifically because it was sharp enough to be worth writing down by Greek authors who were not, generally speaking, in the business of preserving women's wit for posterity, unless that wit was genuinely remarkable. The question of sexual freedom within Spartan marriage customs has generated genuine scholarly debate that deserves more careful handling than either prudish dismissal or sensationalized exaggeration. Several ancient sources, including the poet Alcman and later commentary preserved through Plutarch, suggest that Spartan attitudes toward extramarital relationships were considerably more relaxed than in Athens, particularly when such relationships served the state's interest in producing strong children. Plutarch himself, writing centuries later, expressed visible confusion about how something resembling adultery could even be meaningfully defined in a system where sexual norms appeared explicitly subordinated to civic and eugenic priorities, rather than to the strict marital fidelity expectations that governed Athenian households. This should not be mistaken for some kind of ancient sexual utopia, a framing that occasionally appears in more breathless modern retellings of Spartan customs. The relaxed norms historians describe primarily reflect state interests in reproduction and military manpower, rather than anything resembling individual female sexual autonomy, as a modern audience might understand that concept. A woman's body remained, in the Spartan system, just as much as in the Athenian one, fundamentally instrumentalized toward producing citizens for the state. The difference was that Sparta's particular instrumentalization happened to grant women more education, more property, and more public voice along the way. Not because Spartan ideology valued women as individuals more than Athens did, but because Spartan ideology calculated, with the same cold practicality it applied to training boys for war, that strong, educated, propertied mothers produced better soldiers than weak, uneducated, dependent ones did. None of this means Spartan society treated women as full equals to men by any modern standard, and it is important not to overcorrect the historical record in the opposite direction. Spartan marriage customs included a documented practice Plutarch describes as ritual abduction, in which a husband would seize his new bride from her household without family or ceremonial witnesses present, an institution that, however ritualized and culturally normalized within Spartan custom, still reflects a marriage system built around male initiative and a complete absence of anything resembling a Spartan bride's formal consent in the process, as later sources describe it. Spartan women's formal political power remained essentially non-existent. They could not vote in the Spartan assembly, could not hold magistracies, and exercised influence almost entirely through informal channels, property control, household authority, religious participation, and the kind of sharp public reputation Gorgo specifically cultivated, rather than through any formal office available to them. The cult of Helen of Troy occupied a specific and unusual place in Spartan religious life that further illustrates how differently this city treated female figures compared to the rest of Greece, while Helen was treated elsewhere in the Greek world primarily as a cautionary tale about female beauty, causing catastrophic war. Sparta maintained active shrines to her, and Spartan women specifically dedicated personal items, mirrors, combs, perfume bottles, eyeliner, at these sites as votive offerings. Helen was, after all, considered a Spartan queen by tradition. The wife of King Menelaus, and Spartan religious practice treated her with a degree of devotional respect that stands in sharp contrast to how Athenian tragedy and poetry generally used her as a symbol of female-caused disaster. This devotional practice connects to something larger about how Spartan religious and cultural life carved out specific spaces for women that simply did not exist in comparable forms elsewhere in Greece. The maiden songs of the poet Alcman, composed in Sparta during the 7th century BC, and among the earliest surviving evidence we have for the lives of Spartan women at all, celebrate young women's choral performances, their physical beauty, and their transition through different life stages with a degree of detailed attention that Athenian sources rarely extended to women of any age or status. It is also worth being honest about the limits of what we can actually verify here. Nearly everything we know about Spartan women comes from outsiders, primarily Athenian writers, like Aristotle and Xenophon, or from Plutarch, writing many centuries after the fact and drawing on collections of sayings and anecdotes that historians cannot always confirm as authentic, rather than later invention attributed retroactively to famous Spartan women. The British historian Anton Powell has bluntly noted that calling the surviving sources on this subject merely problematic would be an understatement. Some specific stories, including portions of the Gorgo material, may be partly apocryphal, embellished or invented decades or centuries after her actual lifetime to illustrate a stereotype about Spartan female sharpness that Greek writers outside Sparta found either admirable or faintly alarming, depending on their own city's customs and their own opinion of Spartan society generally. What survives, even accounting for that uncertainty, is a consistent and multiply-attested pattern across independent ancient sources: Herodotus, Aristotle, Xenophon, and Plutarch, all writing at different times for different audiences with different opinions of Sparta, who nonetheless agree on the basic outline. Spartan women were unusually educated, unusually propertied, and unusually outspoken by the standards of the wider Greek world, and this was not treated as scandal within Sparta itself, but as a deliberate, structural feature of how the Spartan state organized its entire society around producing capable citizens, male and female alike. Gorgo's marriage to Leonidas itself sits at an interesting intersection of personal and political history, since Spartan royal succession customs meant her own status as the daughter of one king and wife of another placed her in a uniquely well-positioned vantage point to influence events most Spartan women, even propertied ones, would never have direct access to. When Leonidas marched north to Thermopylae in 480 BC with the force the film 300 depicts, Gorgo remained in Sparta as queen, in a position to continue exercising exactly the kind of political judgment Herodotus had already documented her displaying as a child, confronting her own father's susceptibility to bribery. The wax tablet, decoding whatever its precise date relative to Leonidas's death at the pass, fits a consistent pattern across multiple independent stories. A woman whose sharpness was specifically the kind ancient Greek sources found notable enough to preserve across centuries of retelling in a culture that rarely bothered preserving women's intellectual contributions at all. That is the Sparta the movie never gave you. Not a queen, reduced to a victim in a single invented scene to manufacture political stakes the real history already provided, but a woman from a society that trained its girls to wrestle, taught them to read, let them own 2/5 of the nation's land, and apparently produced daughters sharp enough to decode a hidden warning that an entire council of trained Spartan men had simply given up on. If you want the history Hollywood erased, subscribe to Erased from History, because next week we go somewhere even darker.